Hi everyone, kia ora koutou and welcome. I'm Janice Mackay, your host, and I'm the Welcoming Communities Advisor for Ashburton District Council. We're so pleased to have you join us along with our panellists today, Tony McNeill and Faye-Maree Francis. They're relationship managers from Immigration New Zealand. So welcome again to this free and live webinar. This webinar is part of a series to help build community resilience, showcase a snapshot of our local expertise, and to spark ideas and connections during COVID-19. Today, Tony and Faye-Maree from Immigration New Zealand are on board to share information and advice for migrant workers and their employers. They will discuss what the immigration picture in New Zealand looks like right now, bearing in mind that things are changing every week. In regards to questions, we have a lot of questions that came through prior to the webinar, so we'll try to cover those early. For questions during the live webinar, feel free to send your questions to the panelists using the Q&A box and not the chat box, so we can keep track of them more easily. Please bear in mind that even though your questions might be specifically related to you, the answers might come back a little bit general. Key contacts and government resources will be made available in a follow-up email to attendees tomorrow. All right, I will hand it over to you, Tony and Faye-Maree.
Thank you so much, Janice. Welcome everybody, and it's great to be here. It's great to be the face of immigration and hopefully share some updates for you. I think one of the big things to remember is that talking this morning is the policy we're talking about, the updates we're talking about are at today's date. It's what it means today, and things can change tomorrow. And we're hearing those words unprecedented and uncharted, and I think they are so apt because immigration too is going through uncharted territory, and we're trying to react as best we can. Some of the things I thought I'd do is just go over things you will know, and as Janice said, a lot of the answers will probably be quite generic. And if you have an individual question, I'm hoping we can answer it through that generic medium. As you know, the border is closed and only New Zealanders and partners of New Zealanders, citizens, permanent residents can enter the country, effectively still with isolation requirements. If you're not a New Zealander, you can apply to come in, but it's a very high threshold to access the country currently. And it is probably fair to say that COVID-19 related peoples who are needed in New Zealand would get that exemption, but probably 2 out of 10 exemptions have been approved, which shows you the threshold that's required. One of the big questions from employers is, I have a worker who's been home over for a holiday, didn't get back to New Zealand before lockdown. Due to the border closure, they cannot enter New Zealand. We don't have a sense of when that will be open, and of course that will be a government decision. So at the moment, that worker and possibly even their families won't be able to return to New Zealand to work for you in the near future. You may have to decide to have a plan B in relation to employment. So people who are first-time residents who haven't entered New Zealand will have to delay their arrival in New Zealand. Once again, this is border dependent, and we have a policy on how we're going to look after people whose visa may expire before they enter New Zealand. We're aware of those situations as well. Immigration is obviously working from home at the moment. We have a small amount of staff who are in the office in Wellington, so that's severely restricted our ability to resource and process visa. And all our visas have been in relation to COVID-19. Essential skills visas are not being processed at the present time, but we're hoping to be able to address those as we go forward. One of the big things you're probably aware of is at the 2nd of April, all temporary visa holders, whether it be student or working visa, holiday visa, we automatically made them legally in New Zealand till the 25th of September. This allows us to have a better sense of where we go to from there, but it keeps you lawfully in New Zealand, which is very, very important. Under level 4, some essential businesses who were open at level 4 had the ability to move staff around in their region, in their workplace. So that basically was around that supermarket space. So if you were doing that at level 4, you can do that at level 3. But remember, it's still a narrow band of workers in the essential space as decreed by the government under level 4. So it doesn't mean that everybody can move workplaces now at this time. Immigration's working on policy to address people who need to work within regions, move within regions, but at the moment, of course, under these lockdown requirements, we have to obey the governmental rules in relation to who can move, and it has to be vital or essential in that industry. If you have lost of employment, and we realise that this is happening for Kiwis and for migrant workers, and there's obviously opportunity for people to connect with local council, connect with civil defence, connect with community groups, connect with their embassy and their consulate to see what support is available. It's vitally important that you put your hand up and ask for help if you need it. And we're hearing situations where people are thinking, well, I won't go and ask for help because that's going to highlight that maybe I have lost my job. But immigration is taking a very pragmatic approach to people who have been compromised in employment, and particularly where obviously you're on a visa, a temporary work visa. So don't be afraid to connect with your council, with immigration, to let us know of any changes in your life. We're not looking at compliance activity at this present time. We just want to make sure people are being supported, and no matter what situation they are in. Also be aware of the government subsidy. If your business was closed down over lockdown, you're entitled to the government subsidy. You work that out with your employer. If you have any issues, you can make complaints if you feel that you have been wrongly treated in relation to the subsidy. And I've sent a link to Janice, and she can put that up on the board today. It must be remembered that there's certain criteria for the subsidy, and you have to be eligible for it. So once again, there is a black and white situation, but we strongly encourage you to work with your employer, talk to your employer if you feel things haven't gone correctly. I have to say that people have been worried about residency. So in all situations, immigration is entirely aware of the fact that people might have been on a pathway to residency that was dependent on having employment. That surely is a compromise. I can't change that tension that probably exists in relation to residency and employment. But please be aware that immigration are working on policy to best deal with those scenarios. We don't have any definitive outcomes in relation to that, because as I say, we're all in uncharted territory. We're doing the best we can with the information that we have today. But I ask you not to panic. I ask you to engage with us, to let us know of your circumstances, because then we can be better informed about your plight. And that helps us shape our policy. I think we have to talk long term. We're thinking level 2 might mean something different. Level 1 means that we're all free to do what we need to do. But of course, economically, there's still going to be compromises in New Zealand. You know, tourism is going to be affected. There'll be different aspects of our industries that are affected. And we could see job losses. So once again, we need to be able to reach out and know where people's status is, what your situation is. And once again, connecting with embassy, consulate, local council and civil defence for support. Because it's most important that at least there's food on the table. And I know that doesn't cure all the tension and problems that people are experiencing, but it's those little things we need to do as community. We're all in this together to try and support. I've had several questions in relation to job losses, and if my partner loses their job and I'm dependent on their job. All we want to do is be aware that your situation. And as I reiterate, it's a pragmatic approach to people and their status in New Zealand. So there may be new policy coming up about where you can work in New Zealand. And there's also a new amendment being made that's in front of government at the present time. And what it's looking at is better make decisions on a holistic, volume-based visa decision. So just like we rolled out people's visas from April 2nd to 25th, the information before government at the moment is about how we can grab a group of visa and make a decision for the collective people, for the whole group of people, instead of one-on-one basis, which is obviously resource-wise makes it very, very difficult for us. So that legislation is not designed to be a negative. It's going to enable immigration to be able to make decisions across the board that affect a large amount of people And so it helps to give us efficiencies. So it's nothing to be afraid of. And I have heard that being talked about, that it's a blanket decision and it could be negative, but there's no inference in that at the present time. I think if you have questions, go to our website. So if you go to immigration.gov.nz, we've got a link to COVID-19. So every policy update is on that website, and you can click on it daily to see what new information is available. The reality being is that if the answer to your question is not there, it's because we haven't made a decision yet. But do remember, if you were on a temporary visa on the 2nd of April, you're still legally in New Zealand until the 25th of September. That's what it was designed for, to give you, keeping you lawfully in New Zealand. So no matter what other things are going on in your employment, in your personal situations, that blanket decision is going to help you be legally in New Zealand until we get a better idea, because we just don't know sometimes what the future is going to hold for everybody in New Zealand, particularly who are on migrant visas. So, as I say, the generic answers are, if you've lost employment, touch base with us. You can email us, connect with us, let us know of your circumstances, because we have to think long term. And what we don't want to see is people making short-term decisions about their legality in New Zealand and thinking, well, if I don't engage and if I just go somewhere else, I'll wait till this all goes away. You're better to think about what your 12-month plan is, what your 2-year plan is. Some people may have to exit New Zealand once the borders are open and then return to New Zealand when their job opportunities recommence. So it's about thinking very much long-term. And those are just suggestions. It's not necessarily what will happen, but I think we all have to have a plan in relation to how we're going to keep ourselves safe, healthy, both physically and mentally, in what are going to be very, very difficult times. Janice.
Hi, sorry, I was typing away there to all the attendees with the link. Thanks, Tony. Was just sending through, so it's employment.govt.nz and a whole bunch of other long kind of tags. But we'll send you an email with this link tomorrow. There is one question that came in before, which is that would you like to go through any of the questions now, or do you want to kind of...
Yeah, happy to go through any questions now, Janice.
Yeah, cool. So there's one that says that I applied for residence, have not got any answers. Are there any updates for resident applications?
So at the moment, we're not processing residence visas, but that's not to say it's postponed at the moment, because we've got a priority amount of visa processing. So that's been linked to COVID-19, victims of domestic violence, in particular students as well. So we are processing student visas, because students, international students, are a vulnerable group, and we don't want young people not having a legal visa in New Zealand, not being able to work if there's work available for them. So each day we're moving into another space of what the next visa will be that we will process. We're also doing partnership visas as well, but residency visas are on hold currently.
There's another one here, thanks Tony. It's, can I double check the date for legally in New Zealand? I'm not sure what that's referring to, you might know. Was it the 22nd or 25th?
25th of September, Faye-Maree?
25th.
Cool.
There will be people, and this could be a question that comes up too, who my visa expires on the 10th of July. From speaking with Wellington, we know that we may have to make a decision on the next range of visa expiry, but we are hoping that we will have resource to actually process those visas without having to make a blanket decision on their legality or the length of time they can be here. But we know that we have to make a decision on that.
And under the COVID updates on the website, under visa extensions, there is a visa verification service, and you can confirm your visa expiry date just by checking that verification service on the website.
Thanks again.
Thank you. There's another question here, which is, can an employer keep sponsoring some employees?
I think it'd be fair to say if that you've got employment at the moment and your visa is valid, then the status quo remains. So if there's been no shift in your work and you're still viable and you're still working, so employers can still sponsor workers currently. If they want to take on new employees, it depends on what sort of job it is. At the moment, we're not processing new work visas in that baseline employment. So they can certainly put them in, but when we would get to them is a difficult one. Faye-Maree? Unmute.
Okay. Sorry, can you just repeat that, Tony?
So basically, there's this question there about can I still sponsor workers? So my answer was, well, if you're doing it now, fine. That's, you know, nothing's changed as long as the visa is valid and the job is there. But if you're wanting to employ new staff, there's going to be restrictions on when we can actually process those visas.
Well, that's right too, and we need to take into account that the labour market is going to perhaps look quite different. We've got no answers there, but it's likely to get very political very quickly. But yes, employers can still sponsor an employee that's within New Zealand if they need them. It's just the application when it's submitted. If it's outside essential services, it's unlikely to be processed for some time.
And I think Faye-Maree's made a good point there, is that we have to be very, very aware of unemployment in New Zealand and what does 3 months, 5 months, 6 months look like this year in relation to job losses and who's lining up for employment. So there will be, you know, some tensions there. I think, as I talked to you earlier, Janice, if we looked at this in a non-COVID-19 environment, if we had a recession and it was an economic recession that meant there was 10-15% of people unemployed, then, you know, temporary labour, you know, we would have to look at situations where, look, you need to return to your home country or to another country for some more opportunities if there's no work here for you in New Zealand. And that keeps you safe as well, because at least you're getting home to family predominantly in your home country. The complexity with the COVID-19 environment is, of course, borders are closed. And so you don't have the ability to go home, even if you wanted to. So we're very aware that, you know, we're gonna have some pain, you know, and we can't rose tint that. But if we, as I say, keep connecting, keep sharing that information, it's one way that we can at least keep safe as well. I saw a question there saying my employee's visa expires on the 10th of July. So depending on the nature of that job, that'll be a person that we would probably, as I mentioned earlier, if we were able to process visa by the 10th of July, they would fall into that space. So I think put in your visa for the new visa, the renewal if you wish, and we should have a better idea of where that fits as we go forward. So I think try and just do business as usual for that one. But once again, we'll have a better update closer to probably June as to where we sit resource-wise.
There's another one here. With the collective decision on visas that you've put in front of the government, can you please let us know what they are?
Well, that's still to be passed. Okay, so I think if you just Google Minister Lees Galloway release in Radio NZ yesterday, he gives a full list of why he's doing this, but it doesn't go into a lot of detail. It just says what it's going to give the government the ability to do is for 12 months to make broad decisions on a large amount of visa for the good of efficiencies. And it's not necessarily a negative at all. It's just going to give them the ability to move with a quicker response time in the next 12 months, because we realise that things are going to be compromised in relation to making visa decisions. So at the moment, it's got to be passed by government. So we don't have all the detail, but do have a look at Radio NZ news release in relation to it, and it gives you, it's out there in the public domain, and it gives you an overview of what the government's trying to achieve.
Cool. There's one here with a working holiday visa that will be expired in September. I'm intending to apply for essential working visa this month. When will the immigration be able to do the process to approve it?
Once again, it may be July, August, September, and it's very hard to know because once again, as Faye-Maree mentioned, we will have a different landscape for getting employment. So yes, you may well be able to apply for a visa before his expiry date on the 25th of September. It will be dependent on how many Kiwis are unemployed, what the landscape's looking like, what region it's in, what the job entails, the skill set of the job. So it's very difficult to answer that. And I think once again, I'll go back to the space of, and this is not to sound provocative at all, is that like if I was on a working holiday visa and come August, there's an ability for me to go back to my home country, that may well be the best option. And then reassess my plans and my future. And as I say, I think we need to think long term. You know, you've really got to make a decision for yourself and your family, if that's the case, on what your long term plan is. And often we can get stuck thinking just what's in front of us. And I think it's really important to look long term and have a long term plan.
You mentioned also earlier in the discussion before about having a plan B, maybe even plan C and D as well.
Yeah, look, I think in the farming situation, it's about, and for farmers, we've got June the 1st coming up, which is a big day in New Zealand farming. And it's probably, if you're unsure about where that sits in relation to moving farm workers around the country, immigration at a higher level in Wellington, our national office have been working with the likes of Fonterra, Dairy NZ, and Federated Farmers. So they're working at a very high level because, of course, not only do we have immigration compromises in relation to workers moving farms and share milkers moving farms, you've also got MPI who have a dictate about cattle movements, and then you've got lockdown. What does COVID-2 mean for farm workers to move? And I know that milk is an essential part of our lives and the production of that, but of course there's a lot of mechanisms or levers to be pushed and moved for that to all come together. So immigration is not just one component.
Yeah, it's a real whole of government, community, business response, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's another question which probably is the same answer to one you did earlier, which is that some VACs abroad are closed, so applicants cannot drop in their passports. Although the online applications have been submitted, when will the VACs open? Might be a hard one.
Oh, Faye-Maree? Yeah.
No, look, I'm not sure when VACs will open again, and they will be pretty much subject to the same sort of considerations that are being given offshore. And at this stage, we can't answer that because we don't know, but they're also affected and closed, and they won't be open for some time.
And I think one thing we must realise is that as the CE of immigration said, look, immigration is an important business, but it's not listed as an essential business. And of course, welfare for people and staff, and particularly in the Pacific Islands for the back, is really, really important. So, we are stuck being, working from home as everybody else is trying to do, making the best of a really difficult situation. And so it's really hard to try and get those definitive answers as to when we may back in the office, and we'll have to be really careful about how we go back to the office. And there'll probably be, red team, blue team, when we go back and split the week. And so whilst we would love to be able to, wave that magic wand, we're caught in this other big bubble as well that's got lots of compromises.
Another question is, can an employer keep sponsoring for the essential skills work visa now?
It's probably very similar to that other one, is that
Yeah.
if you've got an employer now and there's a job, the job's safe and they're still working, then there's no issues. But if you want to employ a new person, depending on the job spec, depending on the type of application, and depending when we can get to it, we can say, look, you can go through the process, but I would have to say that we're not doing those particular visas at this present time.
I'd just like to note that if somebody does go ahead and actually submit a work visa, just to note that it's unlikely you'll get a skills match report. A skills match report from Work and Income is still required. So just remember to write an explanation to say that you've either tried or you can't get one. Okay, because labour market requirements are still in place.
Yep. It's like still in New Zealand we have some paper-based applications, and I've spoken to people who like the South Island contribution visa. It's paper-based for their last, and it coincides with their work visa, and of course they sent it just prior to lockdown, so it's probably still in a courier, company somewhere. So we just notated our system as that information has been sent. So we realised that we'll get to it. We can't deem it to be late through these circumstances. And I think the big messaging is that in all our policy in relation to residency, in relation to things that have been compromised, we're really aware that it's going to be beyond people's control in relation to some of these outcomes. So we will have to design a response based around that. And so we're very aware that things have been compromised through no fault of anybody, but we will have to make policy decisions as we go forward, and it's going to be directly linked to the economy, to the workforce, to the labour market, to unemployment, all those considerations. So it really is complicated, but it's not to say that we're not going to take a view that there's been people compromised through no fault of their own.
Another question is just getting some clarification. Do farm worker visas class as essential workers?
Not, and Faye-Maree can help me here. No, not under the COVID-19 essential workers. So that's a really good point you've raised there, Janice, because we have some terminology that can be confusing, because a lot of people actually apply for an essential skills visa.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a generic term that describes a type of visa. Under the COVID-19, the government has listed what is an essential business, so which is available on the government website. So, we're talking that medical, supermarket, etc., etc. So it can be confusing, and there'll still be things like farms operating, but for the purposes of essential, that was a government mandate under COVID-19.
Cool. Okay, I'll just check the wee chat box because there's other questions coming through there. Is there any option for applying a variation of condition if someone wants to change workplaces?
There's a narrow band available, so it effectively was introduced under level 4, and there has been some sort of, I've got it written here too. So under essential 4 conditions, okay, a work visa holder, change in occupation, same employer, same region was allowable. Change employer if occupation remains the same in the same region, and student visa holders working full-time if their employer remains the same in the same region. And so for students, a lot of them work in supermarkets, and a lot of them work in healthcare, aged care or residential response. So they were given the opportunity to, because they weren't studying, because a lot of the time their provider had closed down, they were able to work full-time in supermarkets and in the healthcare sector. Also within the supermarkets, you were allowed to move staff internally. So if I was working in the produce department and that was my core role as per my visa, but I knew I had to be moved into another area, that was allowable. So if you were working at level 4, that's where you're allowed to move employees. And you can still do it under level 3 and level 2, but it's for a limited time only. And I think it's about 6 weeks after we go to level 2, I think.
That's right,
that
yes.
it's allowed to be done. So that was designed solely on a level 4 response to a narrow band of employers and businesses. So it's not something that can be used sort of across the board. But that's not to say that in next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, there may be policy to come out that allows some more flexibility in relation to where people can work, but we don't know for sure.
Is to allow those employers in the essential industries to maintain their labour pool, because of course as hiring is going to be very difficult while we remain in alert level 3.
Cool. There's a question here from an employer. Oh, where did they go? Are there changes to wage requirements for the low skilled, high skilled workers that were due to come in June still going to happen?
I've not heard. No, that's $25.50 per hour is the median wage, Faye-Maree. That's still, there's been no indication that it's changing, is it?
No, unless we're advised otherwise, that policy is still coming. But as Tony has said before, just keep looking for updates, but that's going to be down the track a little bit. So as at today, it was already coming, and it's still on that path.
That was for June, I think it was supposed to be.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of things put on the back burner, hey? There's one here. My visa was applied for in January. Do you think they would look at my visa as if we were still in January, or will it reflect this situation? I'm classed as level 2 at the meat processing.
Okay. That's a really good question. I think it depends when we would get to it and what the policy was or the current landscape was when we got to look at it. And if I think we will also be at the mercy of where New Zealand goes under, COVID-19 as to where the labour market is. So there's been no decision made as to when we draw a line in the sand and say, right, we'll process this under yesterday's criteria, or do we apply it into the current environment? I don't have a sense as to whether we know fully what that will mean. FM?
No, that's right. And we don't want to disadvantage people, but it's likely that the day that it was received would be it would be processed in accordance with policy in place at that time. But when it comes to that genuine attempts and the labour market test, I think that you'll find that that's my musing would be that's going to be to the discretion of case officers in regards with whatever's implemented in the in regards to the labour market. You could be contacted and asked for more information depending who's available out in the New Zealand workforce, New Zealanders.
I think we've had, it's just about the same question, but from an employer, just asking, they've got employees that submitted their work visas prior to lockdown. The skills match reports and the applications probably will have expired by the time they get processed. Unsure if we need to get new skills match reports. I guess we'll hear an update.
Yeah, probably likely to get an update on that because we can't accept an expired skills match report, but that also is going to come down to the changed labour market.
But I think if you, as I say, they're probably going to be in a situation where we're on an interim visa with work rights, I would imagine. It's an assumption on my part. So I mean to say, okay, let's just take it for what it is, day by day, still gainfully employed, still working, and then when we get to process these visas, then we can make those decisions then. So I think, I know it's a worrying time, but of course, we might as well, if you're working currently, then keep working, and let's just keep hoping that things will come out and pan out how you wish, without any guarantees, unfortunately. I know it's a really, really tough situation.
We've got a question that's come in that actually came in before the webinar, and it was in regards to a local farm with a team member and his family who are unable to make it back to New Zealand with a short notice of the borders closing. Holding the position in good faith because they're highly skilled and valued. We're very concerned approaching calving and just need some clarity around timing and process. Really tricky situation.
I think that's a classic example of, as we talked about earlier, someone going home for a holiday and then being caught offshore. It's pure timing, and they're not alone in that situation, unfortunately. I guess this is where I talk about a plan B. There's obviously a valued staff member, but calving's coming up. It all depends on the border. It completely depends on the border as to when this person came back. And if, our Prime Minister heard her say yesterday, she said, we've got to remember that our borders will be closed for a lengthy period of time. But whether that gets changed to include people who are we're working in New Zealand, so you've got a certain amount of people that can come back to New Zealand. The policy may broaden for those who are on a current work visa who are trying to return. I don't know, but at the moment there doesn't seem to be an appetite to extend the border, people accessing the border to other than New Zealand citizens, residents or permanent residents, and wives, family, partners, husbands, etc. So it's a really difficult one, and I think that a plan B is in order. And so it's a difficult situation, but carving's coming up, so I think plan B would be where I would go to, because there's no guarantees that person will get into New Zealand in time.
I think as an employer in the dairy industry, if you have a chat with perhaps your industry representatives, because I know that a number of industries were making cases to primary industries, MPI, about having occupations included on the essential workers list. So you may want to have a chat with your representative if you're an employer and just see where industry is at on that.
Yeah. I think the second part that was quite important on that one, Janice, was too that the worker and his family were on a residency pathway, and I'm not sure which one it was. I can make an assumption that it was a South Island visa possibly, and we'll obviously have a viewpoint on that's been compromised once again through no fault of an individual. So we would obviously have to arrange policy that reflected that. What that actually looks like, of course, I don't know. So there are a couple of parts to that equation. And whilst it pains me to say that, residency is often linked to employment, but we don't know for sure. So once again, let's not panic, but we've just got to have, those plans in place to address whatever comes through policy.
I think it's a bit of it doesn't necessarily mean the end of things, just maybe a long pause.
Well put. Yes. Yeah. Agree. Well done. Yeah.
There's a question here. Is there any chance to let temporary visa holders who are currently staying in New Zealand have a fast track to resident status at all?
No. I don't think there's been no communication about that. No,
that would be a hard no.
Yeah. I think I've said this before when I've done presentations, and Faye-Maree the same, is that in any country in the labour market, you have a pool of temporary workers who come to your country to fulfil labour market shortages, and they wish to do that. You have a pool of workers who come to your country and they have a skill set that may lead to a pathway to residency, and you'll have a set of people who are so skillful that they can arrive in a country, take up a job and get residency. And look, that's how immigration works. It's that situation, but it's when things go wrong that you've got to have that temporary labour market that says, look, now is the time to go home because of these implications. So, and as I talked about earlier, that's what's hit us in New Zealand. The complication is that we can't get people safely home. Yeah, and so what that means going forward will be policy made by government. Yeah.
And I guess in the meantime, just trying to all help each other out.
Oh, look, yeah. Look, we're caught between legislation, policy, rules, instructions, and then people. And so it's that's how it is. It's about people, and we've got these layers of complexity in and around how they live and work. But you're right, it's about everybody pulling together as best we can, and through local government, through community services, and really reaching out to people who are stressful, whether they be a migrant worker, a Kiwi, doesn't matter. We have to, as you said, we have to pull together and then make it work as best we can, and maybe not concentrate on all the things that are a bit dire, and but just have that longer term plan. And at the moment, let's just look after one another and look after ourselves as best we can.
And don't be afraid to go and get that help. If you need, if you are a person who is in urgent need right now too, we do encourage you to call the Welfare Centre at Council, which is 0800 242411. And it doesn't matter what your status is, immigration, residency wise, you can call that number and you can at least be directed to somewhere else that can help. We've got lots of community groups that we're working with, government, everyone's just coming together to try and help people in need. So I just wanted to plug that council number.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jefferson. And we endorse that completely. But And I think one of the things that's really important is that if you're ill, or you think you've got COVID-19 and you're worried that that's going to impact your immigration status, for goodness sake, you need to seek medical help. There's a mandate out there, and it's written in black and white on our website, that if you've got some issues or compromises with your visa, you're unlawful. Look, let's put it, you're unlawfully in New Zealand and you're ill, you just go and get help. And that information is not shared with our agencies. It's about you getting better and getting supported. It's not about the immigration status. Okay, so vitally important that people who, even to the point, Janice, where I've heard, and I hope it's not true, is that migrant workers who have been compromised in their work aren't seeking help in case it highlights the fact that they haven't got work. And that's not we're not worried about that at the moment. You know, we just want people to seek help and get as much help as they possibly can, and don't worry about what government thinks, because at the moment, we just want to help out as much as we can, support council, support civil defence, community groups to do what's right for people.
So true. Gosh, thanks so much everyone for your questions, by the way. There's a load of them that we still haven't got.
I could imagine.
Okay, there's one here from earlier. I have an open work visa for 3 years. If I want to study a course online and sit an exam offline, the course lasts more than 3 months. Do I need to apply for a variation condition so I can study and sit exams?
So they must be on a post-study work visa, FM, I'm picking.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It's hard to give an answer without actually knowing what that visa is, but if it's post-study and it's not interfering with the purpose for which that visa was granted and you're doing it in your own time, I really can't see a problem with it. And that would be the same as a work visa. But once the study starts becoming the primary activity, that's when you would have to look at getting a variation. And it's very unlikely that that would be processed if it sits outside essential service.
Cool. This question. If farming is an essential business and farm workers aren't classed as essential, who is meant to run the farm? Why aren't workers' visas being processed?
I think that dairy, unfortunately, has not been listed as an occupation in the, or occupations as essential service. It's up to employers to work with sector to make a case to Ministry of Primary Industries to have occupations included. So that's something that an employers will have to approach their representative about, their sector representative.
And I get a sense that possibly it's also been linked to movements in regions because of the massive movement involved in farms, that there may have been some thought that, look, people need to stay where they are for safety in relation to in a COVID-19 environment. However, we've got May to obviously come up with whatever Federated Farmers and Dairy NZ and Immigration New Zealand at national level have decided is the way forward. And look, we know it's there, so I'm assuming there'll be policy made that was going to reflect that. But I think it was based on the fact that there didn't want to be wholesale travel in relation to that. But that is an assumption on my part.
There's a question. Oh, could I please repeat the Ashburn District Council Welfare Centre number? Yes. It's 0800 242411. But any kind of phone numbers or websites that we allude to during this webinar, we will send a follow-up email to you tomorrow with. So you can click some links there. Oh, we just had a reply from the person who inquired about their study. They've got a post-study work visa. Just to clarify that.
Well, the thing about a post-study work visa is that they've obviously been studying, but get 3-year visa, they've been studying at a high level. So with an open work visa, we would normally encourage them to find employment linked to their study as the pathway forward in New Zealand. That should still be possibly their focus, but of course it depends where they are and what's available for them.
There's one here. For employers of farmers, if we were due to promote some migrant workers for a 1st of June start, can we submit a variation if the change is just a job role? The employer and the location remain unchanged, or is that deemed non-essential?
Well, if you're going to change the job substantially of a worker, so in relation to if I was working on the farm and they wanted to make me into a managerial position, then normally you would have to advertise, and Faye-Maree can jump in here, but normally you'd have to advertise that position and to see if there's any Kiwis available to do that job. So that process has not changed. So if you change a job substantially by title, by promotion, then under normal circumstances, you would have to go out to the marketplace, do a job contract, job description, just as you would if you were doing a first hire. Faye-Maree?
That's correct. So, and you have to remember that if you do submit that VOC, it's unlikely at this stage to be processed for some time. So they're going to have to continue in the role that they already have anyway. You can't promote them up until they have the authority to work in that new role.
Some of these may, sort of like the remaining questions that are here may have already been answered before, but I'll just run through them really quick just in case. What will happen if someone lost their job and they're holding a restricted visa? Maybe just to reiterate.
Oh yeah, look, unfortunately there's issues if you lose your employment because of a lack of ability to go on the job seekers allowance under current New Zealand law, and it's about tapping into whatever resources you can. And this sounds, I guess, not much help, but it is about contacting your embassy, your consulate, family, community, civil defence, council. Those are places you have to go initially to get that support. That may sound like cold comfort, I understand, but currently under this policy, that's where that sits at the moment.
Yeah. And again, it just might be that kind of, it's horrible being in that like holding pattern in limbo, really uncertain. But while you're in that, go and just get as much help as you can, like through welfare or wherever, and then hopefully you can bounce back and things will change. Things are changing really quickly, aren't they?
Oh, completely.
Yeah. We're probably not going to get to all of the questions, unfortunately, today. I hope that Tony and Faye have answered quite a few questions that you did have. Another thing we talked about just prior to this was maybe holding another one of these in a couple of weeks' time, seeing as everything might have changed again. So maybe we will get in contact or keep an eye on the Facebook page to see if we're doing any other webinars like this. And hopefully we can come back to some of those questions that we missed. Before I kind of close off the session, did you have any kind of final words that you wanted to say, Tony or Faye?
I think from our perspective, there'll be a lot of people who go away today going, well, I never got my question answered how I wanted it to be. They didn't know the answer at all. Some people will go away with some of their questions answered. So all that does is tell us how complex the situation that we're in at the moment. So, I realise there'll be a lot of frustration out there. You wouldn't have necessarily got the answers that you wanted. And that's why I reiterate, tap into whatever support you can get, have a plan B and C and a long-term plan as well. And obviously we have to take stock of our situation. So my apologies, our apologies from Faye-Maree too, that sometimes we won't have all the answers for you, but I draw you back to our website. Seriously, jump on that website, COVID-19 link. It goes through all the options. And as I say, your question may be answered as a matter of policy process over the next days and weeks. So it's a really good place to go because it is centric straight to COVID-19 and immigration.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Tony and Faye-Maree, for your time and sharing your knowledge and information in this webinar for the community of Ashburton District. So as alluded to earlier, may well just do another one of these. Okay. Thanks also to those of you who tuned in and putting forward your questions. Really, really appreciate the way you've taken part in this. So in a day's time, all attendees will be sent a survey link along with the key phone numbers and websites from today. Also provided in that email will be a link to our Ashburton District Council webinar series, so you can watch this webinar and others from the series on demand. And keep an eye out on the Facebook page for any future webinars that we have coming up. Thanks again and stay safe in your bubbles.
Thank you.